Have you ever taken a late-night train ride, glanced out the window, and felt like someone was watching you? Or sat alone in an empty carriage, only to hear footsteps approaching but see no one there? The stories you're about to hear might make you think twice before taking the train alone at night. Stick around until the end, because the last story might make you question reality itself. Story 1. The Hand in the Dark. I had been clean for years, far from the reckless, law-breaking activities of my youth. But something about the last day home before my trip to Germany made me itch for the thrill I had been chasing. I decided to revisit an old haunt, a remote stretch of railroad tracks where my friends and I used to practice jumping. It was dangerous, illegal, and completely stupid, but the lure of reliving that thrill was too strong to resist. The tracks cut through a dense forest, leading to a tunnel that opened onto a narrow bridge over a river. I knew the area well. We had spent countless nights riding wagons over that bridge, the wind in my face, the excitement in my heart. But this time, I was alone. There would be no one to protect me, no one to help if things went wrong. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as I waited by the tracks, the familiar rumble of an approaching train stirring a mix of excitement and anxiety. I hid until the train was close enough, then sprang into action, jogging alongside and grabbing the ladder of a passing car. The train wasn't moving very fast, making it easy to jump. As the train entered the tunnel, a sudden flash of light caught my eye, an unnatural light that made my heart pound. I pushed it away, focusing on the thrill of the ride. But then, from deep in the darkness, I felt it. A hand, cold and clammy, grabbing my leg. I nearly lost control, fear exploding in my chest. I kicked out, but the train accelerated before I could touch anything. Before I could catch my breath, another hand slapped my leg, sending me scrambling up the ladder, my heart beating faster than the train. What the hell was going on? My mind raced as the train emerged from the tunnel. I jumped, not caring where I landed, desperate to put some distance between me and whatever was lurking in that darkness. As the train rumbled away, I stood in the small clearing, my thoughts racing. Who or what was in that tunnel? I couldn't go back to my car. The thought made my blood run cold. But there was no other way. The bridge was too dangerous to walk across, especially if another train came through. I was trapped. The reality of my situation hit me, and I felt a wave of panic. I needed to get back to my car, but every fiber of my being screamed to avoid that tunnel. Desperation drove me to a crazy idea. I pulled out my phone and lied, shouting into the tunnel that I had a gun. The silence that followed was terrifying. I let out a loud gunshot from my phone, hoping to scare off whoever or whatever was inside. I didn't wait to see if it worked. I ran through the tunnel, fear driving my legs. I could feel the darkness closing in, could almost hear the hands reaching for me again. But by some miracle, nothing grabbed me. When I finally emerged into daylight, I turned, expecting to see those hands, those shadows. Instead, I saw two figures standing at the entrance to the tunnel, their shapes distorted by the dim light. A scream, inhuman and terrifying, pierced the air, sending me stumbling back. I didn't look back again. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, the scream echoing in my mind. A nightmare I would never escape. Story 2. The Kid in the Tunnel. The New York City subway system is a maze of concrete and steel, where the mundane and the macabre often intersect. As an MTA employee, I've seen my fair share of strange things in my 7 years on the job, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I spent at High Street Station. It was a routine shift, or so I thought. The platform was deserted, an eerie silence hanging in the air, broken only by the distant hum of the city above. The station, usually teeming with life, felt like a forgotten tomb, its flickering lights casting long, eerie shadows. I was mopping the floor, the repetitive motion almost soothing, when a sharp clanging sound echoed from the tunnel. The sound was so out of place, so jarring, that I dropped the mop in surprise. It was the kind of sound you'd expect if a rock fell onto the tracks, but louder, more purposeful. I stopped, listening, but the silence that followed was oppressive. I tried to shake off my unease and return to work, but the strange noise remained in the back of my mind, an itch I couldn't scratch. 10 minutes later, the sound came again, louder this time, more persistent. Fear prickled at the edges of my consciousness. What could be making that sound? My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. I put the mop aside and moved toward the tunnel entrance, peering into the darkness. The shadows seemed to move, to breathe, but I couldn't see anything clearly. I considered calling out, but something held me back, a primal fear that whatever was in that tunnel might end. I turned back to work, but the tension in the air was palpable, weighing down on me like a weight. Just as I began to think I had imagined it all, a sound cut through the silence, freezing me in place. A child's voice, weak but desperate, calling for help. Every muscle in my body tensed. What was a child doing down there? The voice came from deep in the tunnel, where light barely reached. Fatherly instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my flashlight, ignoring the warnings screaming in my head. I moved closer to the tunnel, my flashlight beam piercing the darkness. The child's voice rang out again, more urgent, almost frantic. "Help me, please." The fear in their voices drove me forward, but my heart pounded in my chest. Something was wrong. Something was wrong with this situation, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As I went deeper into the tunnel, the darkness seemed to thicken, pressing in on me from all sides. The smell of wet concrete and rust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. I rounded a corner, and that was when I saw it. A small, shadowy figure standing in the middle of the tracks. I called out to the child, but there was no response, no movement. The figure just stood there, as still as a statue. I cautiously stepped forward, and that was when I saw the other figure, a larger shadow looming behind the child. Indistinct. Fear paralyzed me. My hand tightened around the flashlight, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The child's voice spoke again, but this time it was different, distorted, twisted, almost mocking. The larger figure shifted, stepping into the dim light, and my blood ran cold. I never saw its face, but I didn't need to. The sheer evil it radiated was enough to make me run. I dashed back into the tunnel, not daring to look back, the flashlight beam flickering as I ran. The child's voice followed me, echoing in the darkness, but it was no longer a cry for help. It was laughter, cruel and sinister. I rushed out onto the platform, gasping for breath, my head spinning. I called the police, stuttering about what I'd seen, but they didn't believe me. They said it was probably just a homeless person playing a prank. But when they searched the tunnel, they found nothing except a small shoe lying on the tracks where I'd seen the child. I never worked the night shift at that station again. The child's laughter haunts me to this day, a reminder that the darkness of the subway holds more than rats and old rubble. Story 3. Traces of horror. I'm not one to be easily scared. As a graffiti artist, I've learned to navigate the dark, sneaking into places most people would avoid. But the night I decided to tag an old, forgotten train on an abandoned track, fear settled over me like a cold, suffocating fog. The tracks I found were remote, hidden from prying eyes, a perfect canvas for my artwork. My friend Lucas followed as he often did, though he didn't like the sight. We walked along the rusted tracks, the evening air heavy with the smell of rotting metal. The cars sat motionless, their vibrant colors faded from years of neglect. Surprisingly, there wasn't a tag on the entire train. It was a blank slate, just waiting for me to touch it. Excitedly, I handed Lucas a can of paint, though I set to work, losing myself in the rhythm of spray paint and creation. A few minutes passed, and I was in the zone, oblivious to everything around me. By the time I finished my third card, I was feeling pretty good about myself. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the clink of empty cans I threw back onto the track. I walked over to Lucas, who was covered in a cloud of smoke, his eyes glazed over. I went over to him, even though I knew it wasn't a good idea. Anxiety often plagued me when I smoked, and tonight was no exception. A sense of unease began to creep in, tightening around my chest. Then we heard it, a metallic clang that echoed through the night. We froze, eyes turned toward the sound. The darkness seemed to press down on us, thick and impenetrable. My heart pounded in my chest. Was the sound coming from inside the train, or it was hard to tell, and both options were equally terrifying. I pulled out my phone, recording as I whispered to Lucas. The tension was palpable, the night air suddenly heavy with a sense of impending danger. The crash rang out again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of a paint can hitting the ground. Before we could react, someone picked up the paint can and threw it at us. Panic set in as we heard hurried footsteps coming toward us, followed by a growling voice, "You better not trip, kid." The next sound was a gunshot, loud and piercing, echoing through the empty night. Lucas nearly stumbled as we raced down the tracks, running faster than I thought possible. Fear drove us forward, the threat of death nipping at our heels. We didn't stop until we reached the main track, panting and shaking. The silence of the night returned, but the horror remained. We drove home in silence, the weight of what had happened weighing down on us. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. Armed with my Glock, I returned to the tracks in broad daylight. The train was still there, but my pass was gone, replaced by patches of red paint. Someone had deliberately erased my work. I continued to investigate, moving from car to car until I came across a car with its door wide open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of bleach. In the middle of the car was a single chair, with ropes and chains scattered around it, some wrapped around the legs of the chair. The sight was eerie, almost surreal, and the smell was so strong it burned my nose. I reached for my phone, intending to record the scene, when I heard that scream again, the same metallic sound that had haunted my dreams since that night. My heart leapt into my throat. I wasn't alone. I backed out of the train car, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. As I left, a cold sweat of fear ran down my neck. The memory of the gunshot, the chair, the smell of bleach, it all merged into a nightmare that never let me go. I still hear that gunshot in my mind, echoing through the darkness when I'm alone with my thoughts.